When we think of economics, most of us imagine charts, spreadsheets, and jargon that only specialists can decode. The authors begin by saying, what if instead we treat economics as something intimately woven into daily life, in relationships, careers, buying habits, and even love? That mindset shift is the book's first promise, to bring you into the fold so you can see the invisible wiring beneath decisions people and markets make. To deliver that, the authors tell fresh stories, some brand new to the Planet Money team, that animate abstract ideas. They don't parade dry theory first and then seek an example. Instead, they lead you through the story so that you feel the question before the answer. A factory in Patagonia, a raisin cartel in California, a peculiar sports contract. These are portals into economic logic, not footnotes. The method is experiential. Walk alongside someone confronting supply constraints, market distortions, or incentives gone awry, and you begin to feel economics rather than only analyze it. One thread winds through chapters: how incentives, information gaps, and institutional design shape outcomes that feel unfair or surprising. For instance, a chapter on dating markets explores how matching and signaling operate in human relationships just like in commercial exchanges. People misrepresent, they screen, they decide when to wait or move now. The economics of matching theory and contracts lurk beneath, and by watching them in everyday life you see where leverage lies. The actionable insight: when you enter any exchange, whether for a job, negotiation, or dating, pause and ask, who holds the information? Who moves first? Who can walk away? Another story takes us to a dumb pro sports contract, one that baffles casual fans. But that bafflement is part of the lesson. When you peel back roster rules, incentives, and tax/bonus structures, the weirdness begins to make sense. That is, what seems absurd in human terms often hides irrational optimization under constraints. For the reader, the takeaway is clear: don't judge a deal at face value. Probe the rules and hidden incentives, often that's where value or risk is hiding. A striking tale follows a smartphone factory in Patagonia. It shows how global supply chains, labor costs, input sourcing, and trade policy combine so that a tiny shift in tariff or regulation can ripple across continents and affect margins, jobs, even local development. The human reality is that decisions made thousands of miles away, in capital markets, trade offices, customs desks, press on the hands and minds of workers in places we may never visit. That story invites a posture: when you buy or sell anything, trace back its chain. You'll often find your leverage, or your exposure, resides far upstream. Throughout the book, the authors repeatedly return to choice, that economic institutions, rules of exchange, and conventions are not natural laws but collective decisions. We accept them as given until someone contests them. That realization is disarming. To see that money, markets, and contracts are human artifacts opens the possibility of rethinking them. A practical corollary: in your own sphere, business, community, even household, identify the default rules you accept, and question whether they serve you or entrench someone else's power. There is also a cautious optimism in their tone. The authors do not pretend that systems like finance or markets are perfect, rather they show how good enough trade mechanisms emerged historically. They point out that many failures come not from greed alone, but from mismatches, misalignment, and perverse incentives. Sometimes small institutional changes, better transparency, smarter contract framing, regulation that limits harmful arbitrage, can tilt outcomes meaningfully. The hope is modest, not revolution, but incremental redesign. Importantly, the authors build a toolbox rather than a program. Concepts like externalities, signaling, arbitrage, information asymmetries, matching markets, and institutional constraints are introduced through narrative, but in each case you're nudged to see: how would you diagnose this scenario? What shift would you try? That way, the stories don't decorate abstract tools, they are the tool in use. One evocative episode tracks a raisin cartel in California. At first glance, fruit seems too mundane to stir economic heat. But the cartel's artificial supply dampening, the lobbying, and the distortion of market prices reveal classic lessons about monopolies, regulation, and unintended feedback loops. The human impact is sharp, farmers forced to dump crops, consumers paying more, distortions in adjacent markets. For you, the lesson is to look for hidden cartels or price setters in your everyday, from industries you depend on to professional networks you inhabit. A few chapters push you to think about scale and leverage. In particular, small inefficiencies, like friction in contract enforcement or regulatory loopholes, when compounded across millions of transactions, can warp entire sectors. For you, this suggests that identifying where small frictions lie in processes you touch, hiring, procurement, contracting, can yield outsized gains if you smooth or eliminate them. The authors also confront the tension between central authority and emergent order. They wrestle with the degree to which monetary systems, property rules, and institutional frameworks are imposed from the top versus evolving from bottom interactions. The narrative doesn't side dogmatically, instead it shows that legitimacy, trust, and coordination are as essential as formal enforcement. It reminds you, any design you propose must reckon with incentives and legitimacy. One of the more speculative chapters peers into artificial intelligence and automation. Who captures the surplus when machines begin to perform tasks humans once did? The authors don't pretend to have final answers, but they frame the question: how does the division of gains shift when capital increasingly substitutes for labor? The story invites you to plot scenarios in your domain. If automation frees up effort, who claims the value, you, your company, or someone else? And how might you design for fair sharing of the upside? Toward the end, the book circles back to the idea of seeing like an economist. Having walked through so many stories, you begin to sense where inefficiencies lie. You see incentives, bottlenecks, hidden externalities. The authors aspire for you to use that sensor in your own life. When you read a policy proposal, an industry trend, a startup pitch, you'll quietly ask, what does it incentivize? Who bears risk? Who benefits? Finally, the book doesn't shy from critique. It acknowledges that powerful actors often shape the rules to favor themselves, and that markets can fail, institutions can ossify, and information can be manipulated. But by exposing the scaffolding we live within, the authors don't leave you powerless, they give you the vocabulary and the lens to intervene, question, and imagine alternatives. In sum, Planet Money is less a textbook and more a guided walk through economic landscapes. It shows not just what economic forces exist, but how they show up, how they twist incentives, and how a perceptive person can spot, question, and sometimes reshape them. After finishing, you are less of a passive observer of the economy and more an informed agent. You see the strings behind prices, contracts, and choices, and you know where to tug.